A very good evening, viewers. And we are back again with our next session of the Learn with Starchild series. Today we are joined by none other than Vandana Joshil. Vandana, she tells stories which, of course, are often written by her. So, warm welcome to you, Vandana.
Hi, Sumina. Thank you.
So, I was just telling people that you are an accomplished storyteller
Oh my.
and and have been telling your own stories, that you write your own stories and you have been telling your own stories to people. So that is
Yes.
so wonderful. So for me, stories have been very magical. Ever since I was a child, I remember sitting and listening to stories which my grandmother would tell. So my brothers and I would sit on the balcony of our apartment and listen to stories every evening. And I will
Yes.
never forget those magical moments. And I sometimes feel they also, inspire you and build your character. Uh,
Absolutely.
so
Absolutely.
yeah, so why your interest in storytelling? How did you begin telling stories?
Okay. I have always listened to stories. Like you said, you've listened to stories from your grandparents. I used to listen to stories from my mother. So my mother used to always tell stories, as in tell us stories, my brother and me. And so when I had my own children, it used to be a ritual every night when we would go to bed. Instead of having them look at the mobile, or when they were too young to read books, I would read books to them. There would be days when reading books would get really tiresome. We'd switch off the light, and I wouldn't want to switch on the light again to read a book. So I would make up a story, and they enjoyed it. There would be days when they would be cranky about something, and so I would make up a story where they were the stars. So for instance, my older daughter's name is Arini, which means adventurous. So I'd make up a story where she's the main protagonist and she's on an adventure, and I would end the story with saying, see, because your name means adventurous, you're having an adventure. uh, my second daughter's name is Adya, which means first. And so I would tell her a story where she would come first, out of any situation, or she would come first in a competition or whatever. And what I then realized is that when I used to say these stories, one is I would have their rapt attention. Second is when they would go to sleep listening to these stories, in the morning they would get up and come to me and say, Mama, I had such a wonderful dream. So somewhere I was triggering an imaginative and a creative streak in them, which I thought was wonderful. And then I saw them transcribing that into their own, whenever they would write an essay, they would have these stories, or when they were sitting with their friends, they would make up these stories. But it was so wonderful to hear them, translate or transcribe what I have told them into different stories. And I think that is so amazing. So that's how I started with storytelling. And then I realized, if my children are enjoying it, let me try with other children too. And thankfully and fortunately, the other kids who used to listen to my stories also loved it, and so on and so forth.
So I mean that's wonderful, and I completely understand what you are saying. So I used to tell stories to my son too, but for me, yeah, I didn't make up the story. I mean, I made up stories I think up to only till when he was age 5. And then I started,
Okay.
reading to him more than making up the stories. I used to even sing stories to him.
Ah. But it's a
And,
wonderful way to connect to your children.
yeah. And yeah, but like you said, if your own children are the protagonists of the story, I think it is so marvelous for them, because they immediately imagine themselves to be
Absolutely.
part of the story, and they're already in it, which is so
Yes,
good.
yes. Which is really amazing.
Yes, yes, it is. It is. So, so as an educator, I would like to ask you. So, should we? I mean, or rather, I'm sure many teachers do. But how important it is to weave such stories into our academic curriculum?
See, it's as simple as this. If you I mean, for those who read a book, when you read a book, the retention, or you remember instances from a book. Similarly, if you look at adaptations of books into movies, a child who has watched a movie, so say for instance, a child who has watched probably Kesaria, Kesari, the movie where Akshay Kumar is, guarding a fort in during the British era. The child remembers that. You talk about a movie on Bhagat Singh. A child who has watched a movie will remember it. So that's because there is storytelling there. So instead of taking out a history textbook and just reading out facts and figures, or telling a child that this happened on this date and you have to remember that, you can't expect a child to remember it. You weave a story into that. And when you weave a story, one is you let the child, you're ticking off a couple of things. You're ticking off the imaginative streak. You're ticking off the retention, because the child is visualizing it somewhere. So you're aiding their creativity. And with all of that, it's very, very easy to remember dates, to remember instances, to remember so many things. So storytelling I'm sure a lot of teachers do this, especially, teachers who teach English. English as a subject, you use a lot of storytelling and visualization. The same can be applied to geography, to history. You try that for maths. Even maths, you bring in storytelling into maths. Imagine the kind of, one is it's very, it's action and reaction. The teacher is telling you the story and you're reacting to it. There is action. The child will remember. I mean, I've tried it a couple of times with my children. And, I've also done a talk on this with teachers across the country. And I've told them, and I've asked them to try it on. And I'm sure there's been very positive results. Of course, I'm not completely an academician, so I can't tell you that this is the way you do it. But yes, trying it out is it won't harm you.
Yes, no, I completely agree with you. I completely agree with you that yes, of course, in English, as you said, or rather most of our languages, most of our language lessons are based on stories. But yes, if we can include it in history, in geography, in maths, even a bit of science, it definitely will work wonders. And as you said, retention is much, much better. Probably even thinking, yeah, when you become more creative then.
Absolutely, absolutely. But why put them in a box of, say, facts and figures, like I said? Don't put them in a box. Let them explore, let them expand. And then you look at the results. The children will be, there will be more retention, there'll be more recall value too, if we give it a try.
True, true. Yes, definitely. So, but do you think the teachers would require some kind of training to do so?
See, I have always believed that we are natural storytellers. If the fact that you could tell stories to your son and I could tell stories to my children, we are natural storytellers. The way, maybe we need to polish it up a little bit more to be in sync with what we are teaching. But I think teachers are natural storytellers. They'll be able to do it without too much of an effort. Yes, maybe they need to streamline it to their subject. So like how a teacher goes back home and prepares for the next day's topic, I'm sure all the teachers are taking down notes and, going through the textbooks. So just weave in a little story into that. Maybe at the beginning of the class or at the end of the class, or maybe as you're teaching the subject, weave in a story. I'm sure the children will remember it, and it will be easier for you also to explain. Like I said, the engagement will be better when you have stories in your teaching.
Yes, I understand. So it has to be part of their planning.
Yes.
And if they plan it and sort of, what is the word for it, include it in their particular topic, it will work better. Otherwise,
And
I guess probably.
training per se, like I always say, learning never harms you. So if you keep learning and you keep updating yourself and you keep undergoing training, you're just adding to your own vocabulary or your own list of skills that you have. So undergoing a training for storytelling should not harm anybody.
Absolutely, I agree with you. Any learning is good for you. Yeah, and of course, as teachers, your learning is what you are, sharing. So yes, of course,
Absolutely.
I think it's fantastic. One must do it. Why not? We spoke of, So when you say, how do I put it? We spoke of character building in children through stories. Can you elaborate on that?
So things like this, when I started my storytelling online, I used to pick up, like we have these moral studies. You want to teach a child life skills, so you talk about empathy. So you build up a story where the protagonist has, ends the story on an empathetical tone, or the goes through series of emotions, and the end, the emotion that comes out stronger is empathy. You're telling the child, this is a very good virtue to have. And like I said, when it's a story, the child believes, especially when it's younger children, when you're building up their, life skills and you're talking of so many things to them, these kind of things they remember. Okay, it is good to be empathetical. It is good to share. It is good to give. It is good to help. So it develops their character. The child understands that ye bas kahi suni baatein nahi hai. You can make this happen, in the story. Like for instance, what I do is when I tell stories, I also try to pick up true incidents. So for instance, there was a true incident of a child living in a high rise society in Lower Parel, who, when her flat went up in flames, her neighbor's flat went up in flames, this girl used her presence of mind, and she remembered one training that she underwent in school where they spoke about fire safety. So this girl, 11 or 12-year-old girl, who remembered that, okay, the fire personnel had said that you must stay low, you must keep a wet cloth on your face. So I used all of that. So it was a small news article in the newspaper, I think about 7 or 8 years back. I picked up that story. I remembered it because it was so very well written in the news article. So I picked up on that, researched a little bit about the child, and then I narrated a story where there was a girl in a high rise, and how she kept her wits around her, and she saved so many people from the flat. And then what happens is, a lot of children, many of the children who were listening to me, I got a lot of comments from their parents saying, you know what, suddenly there is this courageous being in my child, and she's not scared of something. So that's good. If she's not scared, of course you have to be cautious. But if she understands that if you pay attention to what is being taught in school, pay attention to those extracurricular workshops that are being done in school, you can take away something from there which can be useful in real life too. So this was a simple girl. I mean, she and her classmates had attended this workshop, but nobody else remembered. This girl remembered what happened there. And then because of her presence of mind, and because of her remembering, that recall value, she was able to save close to 15 people in her building, which is
Wow.
amazing feat for a 12-year-old.
Yes,
And so,
absolutely.
when a 12-year-old listens to this story, they realize that, heroes are made from ordinary people. You just need to do one extraordinary thing, and there, wow, you're the hero.
Yes. So tell me, which characters have inspired you from the stories you tell or the stories you read?
Oh, there are so many. So, even this girl, like I said, the reason I remember the story is because I probably read it when I was carrying my child or something. I was pregnant with my child. But then that story, impressed me so much that, this little girl, this 11-year-old is able to, what would we do if we were in such a situation? We'd probably scream and panic and, not know what to do, run around like a headless chicken. But she kept her presence of mind. So stories like this, there's her, then there is another child who, helped out a homeless person somewhere in the north. Things like these are stories, and I pick up most of my stories from the newspapers. As cliched or as funny as it sounds, every day you pick up the newspaper, you come across so many stories of courage, of valor, of independence, of so many things. You just need to pick that up, weave your story around it, and it works wonders.
Yes, absolutely. I completely agree with you. And what better than real life stories, right?
Absolutely. So what happens is, now in the day and age where children Google everything, you can also tell them at the end of the story. I do that. At the end of my story, I tell them, why don't you Google this person? You'll be able to see what she's done, or you'll be able to see where she's gone or where she is now. And that, encourages children. It gives them like a boost. Oh, this is a real person. I must find out a little bit more. So instead of idolizing a film star, or idolizing somebody who's way beyond your reach, you idolize somebody who's real, who's really done something, and yeah, be
Yeah.
inspired by them.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. I think that is such a lovely way to go about it. It's really good. So one last question. Uh, how do I put it? So again, like going back to my own son, when he was young, he wanted me to tell stories. He wanted me to read stories. Okay, and he didn't want to read himself. He was too lazy.
Happy
So,
to.
so when should children how do I put it again is move from story listening to stories to reading stories?
See, that's a very valid question. And what happens is not every child is alike. So, for instance, my firstborn started reading a book even before she could read. So she would always go to bed, and I still remember there was a book when she was about 1.5 years old. She'd gone for somebody's birthday party, and as a return gift, she got a book on a bear. So the bear's name is Bablu. So even before she could read, she would read, she would look at the pictures, and she used to ask me and my husband to tell her a story, and we would read out the story. Now this went day in and day out. I think by the time she was 3 years old, my husband and I knew every word by heart because we had read it over and over and over again. But what happened is when she had her sister, she started reading to her.
Okay.
So the younger one, now the question comes is because the older one is reading to the younger one didn't want to read. There's somebody to read for me, so I don't want to read. So whenever we would go to bookstores, the older one would, run in and, she would go through books and she wants this book, that book. While the younger one was not really bothered about it. Haan, books to aane hi hai ghar mein, then there'll be somebody to read it to me. Till I made, I would tell her, I'm giving you so much money. So I would give her like $100 or $150. And I say, okay, this is the money that you have. You select your book and that will be your book. You will own that book. So if somebody wants to take that book, they cannot just take it off the shelf. They need to come to you and ask you, can I borrow this book? So that is an ownership. This is yours. If you want to give it the book, share the book, great. I would always welcome that. But if you don't want to, then you need to read out the story. And so, initially, of course, she was pretty reluctant and, my book and I don't want to give it to anybody. Till then she realized that, if I don't give, I'll have to read it out. So she would give away the book to now where she's 8 years old and she cherishes those books. She reads those books. And there are times when I tell her, you've read this book so many times. Why are you still at it? So, but this is my favorite book. I want to read it. So she reads those books. So it's not just her, I met another child who started reading very early in life, and it is about the parents also. If your child sees you reading, the child will also start reading. If you are able to, instead of, when you get free time, instead of sitting on the TV or sitting with your mobile, if you could just take out your any book and don't even read, just flip through the book. But if you sit for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, even half an hour with that book open in your lap, I'm sure your child will also start following suit. And it
I
won't be long before your child starts reading himself or herself.
absolutely completely agree. I tell my parents the same too. So okay, any words of whatever wish to share with our parents or others who are listening or will
I
listen?
only say, reading is a very good habit, and I think it is very, very important that parents realize how important reading is. One is it improves your vocabulary. It takes you to a world where you can, now of course you can travel the world, but it takes you to a world where you can imagine places, you can imagine things, you can be more than what you are. And always honing this skill of imagination and creativity in a child is very, very important. People think, it's, bacha se bore ho raha hai, or khayali pulao paka raha hai. But I think it is very important that khayali pulao goes on to become something very, very important, very, very useful sometime later in life. So parents, please start reading. And if you don't want to read, at least keep a book open on your lap. And I'm sure your child will start reading. Don't go and, you don't even need to buy books now. You have so many, libraries that you can pick up from. There are even, companies which drop books at your doorstep if you, order them. So go with that at first. Start ordering books. Let your child read through it. Ask your child what your child understood when he read the book. and then take it from there. Now, what I used to also, a small tip that I used to do with my child is, now we are from Kerala, and my husband and I talk to my children in English. They talk to their grandmother in Malayalam. So I would recite a story to my daughters in English or Hindi, and I would say, let me see how much you remember. Your dadi doesn't know this story, so why don't you tell the story to her in Malayalam? Yes, the children struggled. Yes, they even struggle even now. There are some words they don't get. But then the fact that they can learn a new language, irrespective of the fact whether it's their mother tongue or French or Spanish or Japanese or Mandarin or whatever, as long as your child is learning a new language, it aids in their, it's a mental stimulation. Any language learned is a mental stimulation. So I think we must encourage our children to read. We must encourage our children to tell us the stories that they read, and we must encourage the storytellers in our children, because every child is a storyteller. So please encourage that.
Lovely, lovely, lovely. I have enjoyed this conversation so much. And I just remembered a story which I read with my students. It is the story written by Sudha Murthy, How I Taught My Grandmother to Read.
Ah,
So, where the child teaches. I mean, it's such a lovely story, about a small
absolutely.
child, teaching, and how, of course, she inspires the grandmother to learn. So, yes, I've really enjoyed our conversation. It has been very, very
Give me.
interesting. Thank you so much, Vandana, for your time.
Thank you for inviting me. And storytelling is something very special, very close to my heart. And I'm ready to talk about storytelling anywhere, anytime.
Yes, indeed. I can understand that completely. So, thank you so much once again. And
Thank
maybe
you.
we once more later on do something like this again. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you. Take care.
Yes, you
Bye
too.
bye.
Bye.